Some pigeons are feeding rather peacefully on some bread apparently left by a person, perhaps the cinematographer. Among them are a number of very small birds, sparrows, who are also pecking at the bread. There are some people in the background engaged in some apparently benign activities, strolling together, pushing a baby carriage, for example. Then we see a woman pecking at her cell phone rather frenetically with her fingers, similar in a way to how the pigeons are pecking at the bread with their beaks. Ravenously, you might say. The way she's chewing gum, in fact, suggests she's also mindlessly eating the information she's getting from her phone. We see the pigeons feeding again, but this time the relatively non-competitive feast is shattered by a very large aggressive pigeon attacking some of the other pigeons. He leaves the small birds alone, which brings a contrast to my mind of human aggressors who attack weaker, smaller adversaries. I think of Ronald Reagan attacking Grenada, George Bush Jr. attacking Iraq, and so on. There are some walking persons and walking pigeons, at times crossing path, at times following similar paths, but seemingly unaware of each other. Likewise, no one except perhaps the cinematographer notices the lone crippled man among the discarded detritus of human society, such as that large pile of cardboard. However, the fact that the cardboard is stacked together rather than strewn randomly does suggest the benevolent intention of recycling and some kind of sustainable existence, although it also underscores, by contrast, the neglect of the crippled man. Someone has taken the time and effort to organize the cardboard, but the man apparently has been left alone. While the pigeons feed in groups, the humans feed electronically in relative isolation. However, the isolation itself comes across as rather cold and dehumanizing, if not downright violent, somewhat like the neglect of the crippled man towards the end of the piece.
Pigeons have always been a friendly, sociable presence in my culture. We were so used to having them crooning in the cornices of our houses, flapping about on our terraces. In fact, in our language, there is a phrase mimicking them. My grandmother used to say, "Oh, there they are doing gutugung, gutugung, gutugung." And my mother was very angry at this sound. She said it's like a man groaning in pain. Even in our ancient stories, there are some very beautiful myths about pigeons. I grew up with one about a king called Raja Shivi. Now, Raja Shivi tried to be a very righteous king always, and he wanted to be very fair to his subjects. He wanted to protect the innocent against the cruel. So once when he was sitting in meditation, a pigeon came flying to him and said, save me, please. An eagle is after me and it'll kill me. So if you are a king, you are going to look after me." So Raja Shivi said, "Yes, come, I'll hide you in my robe and nobody will be able to harm you." Well, eventually the eagle came along and he said, "What kind of a king are you? Nature decreed that the pigeon is my food. So if you deprive me of food, you're being very unjust because you are to look after my interest no less than the pigeons." So Raja Shivi thought that, well, the eagle is true. I mean, what he says makes a lot of sense to me, but what am I to do? I am committed to looking after the pigeon as well as looking after the eagle. So he said, "Okay, I have a solution. Weigh the pigeon and tell me how much the weight is, and you can cut that much flesh out of my body." So the eagle said, "Fair enough," and the scales were brought, and the pigeon was produced and put on the scales, and the weight was taken. But something very strange happened because the pigeon kept growing heavier and heavier and heavier, and the scale went lower and lower and lower, and finally Raja Shiva went on cutting out lumps of flesh from his body, but nothing could be equal to the pigeon's weight. So finally he sat on the scales and he said, "Well, you can have the whole of me because if I am a committed king, I have to keep my promise." And at that moment, there was a rain of flowers and the pigeon converted itself into the god Indra. And he said, "Well, I was not a pigeon, I was a god. And I was here trying to test how serious you were about being the ideal king." There are symbols to which pigeons are attached in my culture. Loyalty is one of them. And I found a wonderful correspondence to this in a lovely story by the Yiddish writer Isaac Bashevis Singer. It's a story about an old Jewish professor in Warsaw who used to feed the pigeons. And when the Second World War broke out, he found himself very isolated. His friends left him. It seemed that only the pigeons were his friends, and he used to come out in the square and feed them. And one day when he was out feeding the pigeons, someone aimed a stone at his head, which hit him hard, and he fell down and bled and died. And no one dared to accompany his horse on its final journey. And then it was seen that squadrons of pigeons appeared in the sky, and they flew alongside his hearth when his body was carried away. There were people who kept pigeons as pets and kept hundreds of them and used them for a very popular sport, for flying and for racing the pigeons of others. And the pigeons were always very, very loyal to their owners. They knew who they belonged to, which home they should fly back to whenever the owner called out to them in the evening saying, "Ah, ah, ah." From the terrace, the pigeons could recognize the voice of the owner. The pigeons of my country also carried love letters. They were associated with young love, romantic love, and they were the bearers of love notes.
At this hour, dust motes shimmer and float through the gold air. I imagine their movements as music, a silence so loud it breaks sound into vision. I saw a lady feeding the birds across the street, and as I looked at her, it felt like she was holding my hand. I knew she wasn't. I could see her body next to the fence and the concrete between us, a car passing through. I haven't a consideration for plot. I haven't left this body, really, and so the clouds are said to pass, and they do, and they always are. Something has to die in order for a plot to begin. I don't want to die, even now. In the Spanish Pyrenees, when a beekeeper dies, each of his bees is splashed with a drop of black ink. The same potassium in the sea lives in our bones. Between what I forget and what I wake up to is the wound of my body and its open longing, the indiscriminate aperture of the bird on its way to the next black asphalt. A photograph is such a tender thing. It sacrifices all possibility outside of the frame for the one image. Just one image that asks for forgiveness from everything the light falls on. This tiny cut in the skin of the world. A memory is a photograph. But a bird can mend what a camera riffs. A bird is a prayer and a hinge for tomorrow. Every time, I never know what to commit to the page. I want to live in silence. I'm always on the edge of saying something or saying it, and sometimes I return from muteness, as if spit out from the mouth of someone else, my whole body unfolding from the fetal position in the strange air. I run through the olive groves as an act of ritual. Where the olive trees become pine, I sat in a bed of needles to outrun my body. Rituals begin like this, with what the body might become, in an act of resistance against the erosion of all things in time. I keep forgetting. I look at screens for too long and forget the color of the buildings I pass on my way to the subway. Her husband planted roses in the ground once soaked with her blood. You wrote those words on a subway wall. I didn't know you then, but you knew me. These delicate forms dancing before my eyes, bearing witness to morning. I am not alone. I am between a dream and the front door, before the day has a chance to erase me and what I remember. Does anything ever stop moving? Who among us doesn't wish for it to stop?